Welcome back. Even before President Trump was inaugurated, Republicans promised to get to the bottom of Russian interference with the 2016 presidential election. On Friday, Senators Chuck Grassley of Iowa and Lindsey Graham of South Carolina issued what's called a criminal referral of Christopher Steele to the Justice Department. Steele, as some of you know, is the former British spy who produced the infamous dossier on candidate Donald Trump. In other words, the two Republican senators are asking for an investigation of a man who many believe was simply trying to expose Russian meddling. So joining me now to discuss this and some other issues is Senator Lindsey Graham. Senator Graham, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to play something that you said to me 1 year ago tomorrow. Here it is.
If after having been briefed by our intelligence leaders, Donald Trump is still unsure as to what the Russians did, that would be incredibly unnerving to me because the evidence is overwhelming. If after the briefing he is still unsure, that will shake me to my core about his judgment.
Senator Graham, just yesterday, the president again referred to the Russia investigation as a hoax.
Right.
I take it you must still be unnerved.
Well, the president does now finally believe that the Russians stole the emails from the DNC and hacked and Clinton.
He does?
And the Russians, yeah, but he believes that collusion is a hoax. All I can say is that it's not a hoax. The Russians stole the emails. They did interfere in our elections. We now know that Trump Jr. met with the Russians in Trump Tower and that Bob Mueller is doing a great job. He's the right guy at the right time. He needs to be allowed to do his job. And whether or not there's collusion, Bob Mueller will tell us. I've seen no evidence of collusion. But the idea of Jeff Sessions being able to investigate the campaign he was on is unacceptable. Jeff Sessions did the right thing. It would be impossible for him to look into the Trump campaign activities with the Russians. Well, Mr. Mueller had to be appointed as special counsel, but we need a second special counsel to look at the way the Department of Justice conducted themselves.
All right, before I get to that, I want to ask you, does the president's behavior towards Russia and Vladimir Putin throughout his first year in office at all raise any suspicions with you?
I've always said he had a blind spot to Russia, but things are changing for the better. He finally allowed the Ukraine to be given defensive weapons. But when it comes to Russia, I've said on your show 1,000,000 times, he has a attitude toward Putin that I think is counterproductive. The president does believe his intel agencies. He is firmly telling the world he didn't collude with the Russians, and we're not going to let him be the final authority on that. We're going to let Mr. Mueller tell us whether or not this campaign colluded with the Russians, and I will do everything I can to make sure that Mr. Mueller does his job. But there's other things about the Department of Justice and this investigation that bother me greatly, and I think we need a special counsel to look at those things.
How does a second special counsel right now somehow not become disruptive to Mr. Mueller's ability to do his job?
I don't think Mr. Mueller can look at Mr. Strzok, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but the guy who was in charge of the Clinton email investigation was fired by Mr. Mueller because we discovered emails between Mr. Strzok and Ms. Lace.
By the way, doesn't that make you feel better about Mr. Mueller, that he fired it before anybody brought it up, before it became some right-wing conspiracy?
Absolutely. It makes me feel good about Mr. Mueller, but it doesn't make me feel good about Mr. Strzok. Here's what one of the emails said to Ms. Lace. He was writing, "I want to believe the path you threw out for consideration in Andy's office, that there's no way he gets elected, but I'm afraid we can't take that risk. It's like an insurance policy in the unlikely event you die before you're 40. This is the guy in charge of investigating Clinton who called Trump an idiot. When you look at those emails, he had a political bias against Trump. But I want to know who was in Andy's office.
Can I ask you
this?
And
I want to know, did this FBI agent feel like he had to take the law in his own hands and create an insurance policy against an outcome of an election he may not have liked?
Do you think it was a political bias? How do you know it wasn't something that he had found in his investigation?
I want to know what the insurance policy was. He was fired by Mr. Mueller correctly. but I don't think the Department of Justice can investigate themselves. Mr. Orr, the number 4 guy at the Department of Justice, wife worked for Fusion GPS, the group that produced the dossier. Did Mr. Orr interact with Mr. Steele? If he did, that's a conflict of interest. During the time that Mr. Steele was being an informant for the FBI, we now know he was shopping the dossier to journalist outlets all over the world, which is inconsistent, in my view, with being a reliable informant. There's a bunch of stuff about the Department of Justice, how they conducted themselves, that need to be looked at just as much as Trump needs to be looked at. And I'm going to insist that a special counsel look at these things.
Let me ask you, though, to tie Mr. Steele with the word criminal, unnerved folks that are friends and allies of yours. Here's Mark Salter, longtime aide to Senator McCain. He writes to you on Twitter. He writes this: from all credible accounts, Steele is a solid guy who was so worried that America's enemy, Putin, had compromising info on Trump that he exposed himself to risk to bring it to the attention of U.S. law enforcement. That's the act of an ally, not a criminal. And then he directs that comment to you. What would you say to Mr. Salter about
Mark,
Mr. Steele's integrity?
Yeah, I don't know Mr. Steele. All I can tell you is what I've seen in the classified file. Mr. Steele was on the payroll of Fusion GPS, who was being paid by the Democratic Party to do opposition research on Donald Trump. That while he was working with the FBI, he was shopping this dossier all over the world. That's not what an informant should do. I don't want Lindsey Graham to make these decisions. I want a special counsel to look at not only how Mr. Steele conducted himself, what the FBI did with the dossier, whether Mr. Orr, whose wife worked for Fusion GPS alongside Mr. Steele, what involvement did he have in the dossier? And I want to find out if the lead investigator of the Clinton email investigation had a political bias against Trump for Clinton to the point that it was a sham investigation. I don't know all these things, but I can tell you somebody needs to look. If you believe Robert Mueller should be looking at the Trump campaign, count me in. But if you ignore all this stuff, you're blind.
How Mr. Steele's not an American citizen. Do you want him do you want him extradited?
He was asked to appear before our committee. Come in and tell us what you did. In a public filing in England, he was sued for libel based on the dossier. He said in response to the lawsuit that he didn't give the document to BuzzFeed, but he did give it to journalists throughout the world, talked about the contents of the dossier. Mr. Comey told President Trump, here's this dossier, it's unverified. I don't think an informant for the FBI should be taking the product and shopping it around to journalists throughout the world. The system doesn't work that way. Let somebody other than Senator Graham look at this. I think Mr. Orr had a conflict of interest if he worked with Mr. Steele, because his wife worked with Mr. Steele. And this FBI agent that Mr. Mueller fired, the way he conducted the Clinton email investigation should scare us all. It could be Trump today, you tomorrow. So the FBI needs to play by the rules, too.
Boy,
I support Mr. Mueller, but somebody needs to look at the Department of Justice.
Senator, you are painting a picture of a lawless Department of Justice and a lawless FBI, totally filled with political partisanship. Do you really believe this?
I believe that Mr. Strzok was a political hack. I believe that Mr. Orr had a conflict of interest. His wife worked for the organization that produced the dossier, and if he interacted with Mr. Steele, that is wrong. I believe Mr. Mueller fired Mr. Strzok for a reason, but that's not the end of the inquiry. I believe there's plenty of evidence that the Russians interacted with the Trump campaign, and Mr. Mueller is going to get to the bottom of it. The FBI is a great organization, but no organization is subject, can't be looked at. If you're not worried about Mr. Strzok being in charge of the Clinton email investigation, given his attitude toward the Clintons and Trump and what he said, then I think you're blind to the fact that this whole investigation needs to be looked at independently.
I got to ask you something. The president sort of joked with you the other day, and he said, boy, Lindsey used to be a great enemy of mine, and now he's a great friend of mine. What's changed? A lot of your friends have been asking me that, going, hey, ask the senator why he's suddenly cozying up to President Trump. What would you say to them?
Because he's president of the United States, he's going to make a decision about immigration I've been working on for a decade. He's president of the United States, going to make a decision about North Korea, which is one of the biggest threats to the world at large. He's going to decide whether or not to stay in the Iranian agreement. I've enjoyed his company. He beat me like a dog. I said everything I know to say about him. I used every adjective on the planet. I lost, he won, and I feel an obligation to help him where I can. I've enjoyed working with him. I don't think he's crazy. I think he's had a very successful 2017. And I want to help him where I can, and we should all want him to be successful. He's got a lot on his plate.
If he asks you to serve in his cabinet, would you say yes?
No.
Okay, that's definitive. No ifs, ands, or buts. We will not be hearing the name Secretary Graham on any cabinet agency.
You got it.
Okay. Senator Graham, that got a laugh from the in-studio audience from here. Anyway, sir.
That's a hard crowd, too.
Thank you for coming on and sharing your views. Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here, and then click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.